lot of soil has disappeared from the surface of this site. That's exposed the roots of trees, but it's also exposing artifacts. And this is a spear point made of quartz. Looks like it's got a slate stem or slate notches on the tip, made by the striking of flakes off of here to create the overall shape, detailed flaking to produce the notches.
September 4th, 2004, an important day of discovery in Nova Scotia. Archaeologists Bruce Stewart and Mike Saunders find a link to a 6,000-year-old settlement, a simple quartz arrowhead used by the Mi'kmaq in fishing on the Mersey River. This arrowhead, and more than 20,000 other artifacts they found on the riverbed, represent the long-lost key to Nova Scotia's ancient past. To Mi'kmaq, the ton of artifacts discovered in the Mersey River mud is the physical proof of their oral history. It speaks of this important waterway and their ancestors' way of life.
It's connecting me more to the land. It gives me a greater feeling that, these were my ancestors. And I'm just, in my mind, it's going through, and what were they thinking about 11,000 years ago when they were chipping these, chipping their arrowheads?
The arrowheads are part of this massive archaeological treasure trove that tell the story of a structured, disciplined, resilient, and very spiritual people suddenly beset by all the trials of modern man: war, disease, and betrayal. This is the story of the Wabanaki, people of the dawn. Only 400 years ago, Europeans settled what is now Nova Scotia. But more than 6,000 years ago, Mi'kmaq sat on this riverbank and fashioned deadly quartz spears for fishing and hunting. 6,000 years ago, before Christ, before the Roman Empire, before Alexander the Great. In Europe, the Stone Age. Mi'kmaq life in Nova Scotia. Beautifully preserved artifacts from the mists of history. And what is even more remarkable is how little we know about the founding peoples who welcomed Europeans to these shores, and the price they paid for that hospitality. The Mersey River, a waterway that drains a large part of southwestern Nova Scotia, from deep inside Kejimkujik National Park, south to the Atlantic and the town of Liverpool, north to the surging tides of the Bay of Fundy, and the rest of Turtle Island, or continental America. Mi'kmaq historian Don Julian.
The Mi'kmaq were a maritime people. We were mostly fishing. About 80% of our way of life was fishing. The other 20% is actual hunting. And the hunting portion of it was to create our own clothing. I mean, we didn't have today's type of clothing. We had skins of animals. So, I mean, the hunting was very, very, it was more or less in the winter months.
The mighty Mersey became an important part of electrical power generation in this province. 1929 saw the construction of the first of 6 dams and power generating stations on the river. It was the subsequent flooding of hundreds of acres of land that covered and preserved the evidence of centuries of Mi'kmaq habitation. Archaeologists were hired in 2004 to survey, collect, catalog, and study the area. What they found was unique for a number of reasons.
When we started the work for Nova Scotia Power, we expected that there would be a number of sites found between Lake Rossignol and the shore of the Atlantic coast. But what we were not prepared for were the richness of those sites, the level of material found on them, the extent of those sites. One of the most significant areas for Mi'kmaq settlement in the province.
When Nova Scotia Power decided to drain the waterway for much-needed repairs to spillways, dams, and turbines in the summer of 2004, through consultation with the Nova Scotia Museum, they surmised if local history was correct, it would reveal a record of centuries of Mi'kmaq life on this river. Remarkably, the water dissolved and washed away much of the organic fiber, earth, wood, and matter, leaving stone artifacts and centuries of life laid bare, a bountiful record from hunting and fishing encampments that flourished for thousands of years. These stone fish weirs are only part of the treasures exposed by receding waters.
What we saw from Mi'kmaq people currently eeling on the river, we were able to jump back a couple of generations to see evidence of eeling on the river just prior to dams having been put in, and then jump back thousands of years to see that continuum of Mi'kmaq activity, Mi'kmaq resource extraction from the Mersey River.
It is early October. The Mersey is swollen with just enough rain to send the eels downstream to the Atlantic and across to the Sargasso Sea. This is a biological journey they have repeated as long as Mi'kmaq have fished here. And Danny Francis has been fishing here all his life, learned it from his father and grandfather.
You set up in August, and you're going to run through till October. The dark of the moon in October is your big run. That's when you have to stay up all night and tend your weir.
There were some 33 weirs found on the Mersey. As you can see, stone wings funnel the fish to a central point where they are trapped in a basket. Archaeologists' estimates make this structure some 4,000 years old. Imagine a technology and a system that old, still in use today.
This weir would probably have been used anywhere from 3,000 years ago up to probably historic times. The reason we know that is because the artifact type that we're finding on the surface of this site we're dating by association with this particular type of weir. This weir appears to be what we would define as an upstream riverine estuary weir, likely used to harvest salmon. The whole purpose of these weirs they were designed to entrap fish for capture, for subsistence purposes for some of the local populations who lived here on the Mersey River.
You shoot your eels in as they come down during the rain. And as the water rises, you've got to be able to keep raising your chute with the eels coming in. But there's two wings go out. Two wings, and you herd them in. And in your chute they go and into your catching box, and that's basically it. I'm looking at my past, and what's a livelihood that's gone, and it's never going to be replaced.
It is normal for an archaeological site to give up 10 or a dozen artifacts, perhaps on larger, more concentrated digs, 2,000 or 3,000. On this 20-kilometer stretch of the Mersey River from some 70 campsites, they collected and identified over 20,000 artifacts. These are some of the more spectacular pieces removed from the river. An adze estimated to be between 3,500 and 5,000 years old. This quartz arrowhead chipped to a fine point about 2,000 years ago. A spearhead with very intricate design 4,000 to 5,000 years old. This ulu used as a cutting tool some 4,000 years ago. And a piece of pottery with a design that dates it to about 2,000 years. But how can a piece of smooth stone or a quartz chip teach us anything? And for that matter, how can you possibly date it?
The same is true with the different kinds of groundstone tools or chipped stone tools that we find. And different techniques in manufacture, different materials, different shapes were common to different time frames. So that it's the typologies that have been developed that allow us to identify things as being, 1,000 years old versus something which we were quite excited to identify as being potentially 8,000+ years old.
It is all science, technology, and detective work, searching and comparing and educated guessing. But in the end, it is being there, the excitement of discovery. Another prized piece, possibly the most exquisite and intricate of the project.
It was a beautiful ground slate harpoon head. This was just so beautifully made, demonstrated such a fine skill, fine detail, that it wasn't until I actually could reach down and pick it up in my hands and look at it that I was able to say, indeed, this is a ground slate harpoon head, several, 3,000, 4,000 years old, and it's lying here on the surface in my, at my feet. It's an excitement, and at the end of that day, basically just, the crew kind of gathered around. Nobody wanted to leave because there was, more shoreline to walk and more sites to deal with. But I had to make them fully aware of what they had been through that day, and that as far as their careers go, particularly the nature of our sites here in Nova Scotia, that this was a highlight, and they would go a lot of years before they would have such an exciting and meaningful encounter with the past.
Lisa Francis is a Mi'kmaq from Pond Hook Reserve, part of Acadia First Nation. Her story is not untypical. Grew up off reserve, but she always knew she was Mi'kmaq. She was taught the culture and spent many happy summers with her grandparents. Her job as Economic Development Officer for the Acadia Band brought her in direct contact with the Mersey Project.
I took a lot of time, weekends and stuff on my own, and went to visit different sites that they had found, and especially the fish weirs, just seeing their structure, and maybe one of my ancestors might have built that and how they would have used it, and it brought a connection closer to home than what I felt before growing up, because I grew up in a non-native community at first, and then I moved on the reserve when I was 11, so I never grew up with that spirituality or that cultural connection. And I think by going through this whole process this summer really brought me closer to home.
But to an increasing number of people, archaeology is an important political tool in a struggle for recognition and legitimacy. When you realize that Mi'kmaq were forbidden to practice their beliefs or connect to their culture for so many years in the colonial attempt to assimilate, you begin to see how important these artifacts become to the Mi'kmaq today.
I just stood there and sort of stepped back and took a look at what they might have done and where they might have camped and the waterways that they might have fished in. And it was truly amazing to see it to picture what it would have been 3,000 years ago as to what it is today.
Resourceful and skilled people making this land their home for thousands of years. But exactly who were the inhabitants of the Mersey River system?
According to archaeological evidence, it goes back 11,000 years. Now, the Mi'kmaq is part of the Wabanaki Confederacy. The Wabanaki Confederacy consists of several tribes in New England, also in today's New Brunswick. There were the Passamaquoddy, the Penobscot, the Abenaki, the Maliseet, and the Mi'kmaq comprised of the Wabanaki Confederacy. We had a lot of protocols in place, we had a lot of understandings, and we had a lot of different meetings. In the Mi'kmaq territory, there were 7 Mi'kmaq districts, and each one of the districts had a district chief. We had several different districts. Cape Breton Island was called Unama'ki. They had their own district chief. You had one which was Piktuk Ahebegwitk. Pictou County, Pictou and Antigonish County, and Prince Edward Island. Ebegwitk is the body of